Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Tonight, we welcome as our speaker Professor Arindam Chakrabarti, a comparative philosopher who will speak on self-ignorance. Why are we afraid to know ourselves? I will step aside to allow someone we all know well, Swami Sarvapriyanandaji, to introduce you all to the professor. But before I do so, I would also like to welcome a very distinguished member of our audience tonight, Professor Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak of Columbia University and Fellow of the British Academy. We are privileged to have you here tonight, Professor. Thank you.
Namaste and good evening. We are delighted and pleased to welcome in our midst a most distinguished guest speaker, Professor Arindam Chakrabarti. I'll introduce him, and unfortunately, I am unable to be present here with all of you, although I'm virtually present. But this recording, of course, was done a couple of days before this event, because I have to be in the Vedanta Society of Portland for their centenary celebrations. Professor Arindam Chakrabarti is the Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at Ashoka University right now. Before this, he was for more than 26 years at the University of Hawaii teaching philosophy. He has taught in numerous most prestigious institutes across the world, at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Edinburgh, in Trinity College in Cambridge, the Sanskrit University in Tirupati, the University of Calcutta, the Delhi University. And in fact, he was right here in New York for a couple of years at the philosophy department at Stony Brook University. Professor Chakrabarti was educated in Calcutta. He had a traditional Sanskrit education in Nyaya and other subjects in Indian philosophy. He proceeded to get a PhD from Oxford University in 1982, studying under such giants of analytic philosophy as Sir Peter Strawson and Sir Michael Dummett. His main areas of interest, study, and research are the philosophy of language, logic, metaphysics, the philosophy of mind, and Indian philosophy, various strands of Indian philosophy. He has worked in this area of trying to combine Indian philosophy, issues in Indian philosophy with the rigor of analytic philosophy, Western analytic philosophy, and of course, the traditional Nyaya form of analysis. He has numerous publications, over 100 papers, and several books, including his latest, Realisms Interlinked, Objects, Subjects, and Other Subjects, published by Bloomsbury, London, which was published in 2019. His next book is called The Book of Questions, Analytical Introduction to Indian Philosophies, which is something that I am looking forward to, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this. We are all eagerly looking forward to that book. He is also a lifelong sadhaka, a spiritual seeker and practitioner all his life, and that makes him specially dear to us. This evening, he'll speak on a subject of self-ignorance, that we do not know our real nature. Advaita Vedanta, we all know, the central teaching is that we are Brahman, that we are infinite existence, consciousness, bliss, not just these mortal bodies or even these little minds. And we do not know this, and that is why Advaita Vedanta exists, to teach us something that we do not know and give us this saving knowledge of that you are Brahman. But what is this not knowing ourselves? Why do we not know ourselves? Why is it so difficult to know ourselves? What is the nature of the knowledge of Brahman, and what is the nature of ignorance of ourself? This will be the subject. It's a subject of profound implication for Advaita Vedanta. Why just Advaita Vedanta? All the other strands of Indian philosophy, which Professor Chakrabarti himself has worked on in Nyaya, Vaisheshika, various forms of Buddhist philosophy, in Kashmiri Shaivism, in all of them, they all claim to be knowledge systems, and they all claim to attack or overcome ignorance. So the issue of what is ignorance is of great importance, very central to Advaita Vedanta, but of course of great interest to other systems of Indian philosophy. Why just Indian philosophy? Any philosophy anywhere. In fact, in the broader sense, any knowledge system anywhere, including modern science in its various departments, they are all increasingly interested in the issue of what exactly is the nature of ignorance. Today, of course, Professor Chakrabarti has chosen to specifically focus on Advaita Vedanta and the issue of ignorance of the self. As he always does, he brings to bear his profound scholarship, his analytic skills, but also his philosophic creativity. So I have no doubt what he will speak about this evening will be a landmark contribution to the age-old tradition of Advaita Vedanta. I know as young monastics, as monastic novices, brahmacharis, we had to memorize by rote what is ignorance. Ajnanam tu sadasadbhyam anirvachaniyam, that ignorance cannot be classified as ultimately real nor as utterly unreal. Trigunatmakam, ignorance is composed of three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Jnana virodhi, ignorance can be destroyed by knowledge. Bhava rupam yat kinchit, it is an intangible something which is positive in nature. And it is this intriguing term that ignorance is not just the absence of knowledge, it is something positive in nature. This is what Professor Chakrabarti is going to narrow down on and focus on this evening. So I am sure we are in for a profound metaphysical, epistemological journey this evening into our own nature and our intriguing, mysterious ignorance of our own nature. Thank you. Namaste.
Om Sarada Ardha Shariraya Sri Ramakrishnaya Vedase Omkarnath Devaya Sitaramaya Vainama Jivagre Rajatam Kali Jiva Adya Jatavedasa Lola Jiva Jaganmata Jivaya Navidhiyate. I would try to avoid showing off my Sanskrit and to make up for these Sanskrit verses, I'll begin the talk with a quotation from Donald Rumsfeld. But first, Aldous Huxley. If most of us remain ignorant of ourselves, it is because self-knowledge is painful, and we prefer the pleasures of illusion. A little bit of Katha Upanishad. They who dwell in the middle of ignorance, posing to be wise by their own judgment. This verse it feels like autobiography to me. Deeming themselves very learned. Befuddled are those fools who wander about, round and round, circling, like blind men led by the blind. The last part, I cannot resist the temptation of quoting in the Sanskrit original from this beautiful Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, Andhe naiva niyamana yatha andha. First, let us talk about ignorance in general. And here I shall go from the ridiculous gradually to the sublime. First, the ridiculous. Rumsfeld's epistemology. Donald Rumsfeld defended the Iraq War by a sophisticated taxonomy of knowledge and ignorance, with the insidious we, that other co-opting first person plural, that includes and excludes arbitrarily. And he said, as we all know, there are known knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know that we don't know. Such a comprehensive inventory of governments' knowledges, ignorances, even iterated meta-ignorances, does not come with any spirit of confession or humility. It comes from a position of power, the power of sanctioned ignorance. In the current corporate milieu, from which we in the shrine are not exempt, such flaunted ignorance exudes more power than even knowledge does. There's a beautiful book out, I think 2012 or 8, called Agnotology. Agnos, not knowledge, from which agnostic comes. The subtitle, The Making and Unmaking of Ignorance. It starts in the preface by that book. We live in an age of ignorance, and it is important to understand how this came to be and why. Contributions, swimming as we do in oceans of ignorance, examples could be multiplied ad infinitum. Contributions to this volume probe the secrecy maintained by military classification, the doubt peddled by manufacturers of carcinogens. In fact, one company proudly said, doubt is our product. And you can see that when you go to a mainstream best hospitals or surgeons. I went for months and years for my vocal cord disease from Addenbrooke's in Cambridge to UCLA Hospital to Mysore Speech and Hearing Center. And the final judgment, apart from the very technical scientific word that we are very happy spending so much money, I got a diagnosis. This person is suffering from spasmodic dysphonia. I looked up, it means loss of voice. But in Latin, which is the Sanskrit of science. Now, I said, is this what? So how do I get better? They said, unlike old quacks, we don't say this is how you'll get better. We say, we don't know. Now, the less a doctor knows, the more we pay them. Some of this stuff is talked about in that book about the environment and all. There are some very heartbreaking examples in my own life. And they are not about not knowing what is the actual prognosis for a patient, but very proudly preserving one's own ignorance about one's own self. A very, very famous philosopher who changed from philosophy to literature with a book called Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature. He told me personally that I think laughing at one's own culture is the hallmark and unique characteristic of European culture. No other culture laughs at themselves. So I said, Richard, I have got examples after examples of the Vedas from Rig Veda onwards. Rig Veda mocks in the most hilarious way Rig Veda chanters, comparing them to frogs in monsoon. It is in the Rig Veda. That's where Tulsidas takes it from. Veda Padata Janu Batu Samudaya, he says, about describing frogs. He reverses it. And then I gave many, many more examples. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna is full of mocking at himself. Everything. I was telling some young men yesterday night that when, in the last time when he went and danced against Dr. Mahendralal Sarkar's advice, at night he was eating in Dakshineshwar. This is the beginning of his voice problem, the cancer. He said, I had asked Sharadama, this woman, that would you like to come also? Thank God he didn't go. We danced so much. Calcutta people would have said, Hangso Hangshi Esese, making fun of his word, Paramahamsa, that people call him. So when I gave these counter examples, very simple answer from Mr. Richard. He said, I don't know about these. So I said, but don't you understand? You have written a book on logic before. That a unique characteristic means you are making comments on other cultures, not about yourself. That means no other culture has that. He said, I don't know. Now, to the sublime. Obsession with darkness and shadows as metaphors for our ignorance, from which comes the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad prayer, Tamaso Mam Jyotirgamaya. This obsession starts from the earliest, Rig Veda 10:129, Nasidhiya Suktam. Swami Vivekananda translated completely this Vedic hymn. After that, there are at least 100 classic translations that people did. Max Muller's being one of the more sort of lame ones. Death was not then, nor immortality, neither existence nor non-existence. The night was not separate from day. At first, in darkness, hidden darkness lay. Tama asit, tamasa gudam. So one darkness was covering another darkness. What does that mean? Simple. The nature of the hidden darkness is hidden by the darkness of our ignorance about it. So the one is the physical tamas, the other is the darkness of our. Now what? We'll talk about that. Some people will say our lack of knowledge. Some will say no, it's the primordial element out of which everything is made. Because this avidya, this non-knowledge, will ultimately become identified with the power of the ultimate reality, of the self. But more of that later on. This darkness is the darkness of ignorance. When Shankara interprets the word avidya, he goes three ways, and all three are important. First, he says, and in fact, these are not esoteric things. If we reflect carefully on what are the antonyms of knowledge, right? Because of Descartes, we think of doubt as the antonym of knowledge. Shankara also talks about that, Samshaya. Samshaya. There are 16 things that one has to master in order to have that Moksha Shastra, which is called Nyaya Sutra. And the first sutra lists the 16. The third of them is Samshaya. Pramana, Prameya, Samshaya. Prayojana, Drishtanta, Siddhanta, and so on. Even Tarka, Vada, Jalpa, Vitanda, all of these are conducive to moksha. It's a sad state of affairs that either in the name of extolling the great literary qualities of Indian knowledge systems, which has become a political term nowadays, either because of that or because, I don't know what, of poo-pooing philosophy and logic and rational argumentation as opposed to the Indian tradition. People, even yesterday, we heard a lot, as if you cannot extol bhakti unless you denigrate analysis. But the greatest texts on bhakti and the greatest stotras of the Vaishnavas, of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, who was being represented yesterday in the talk on the Indian gods and goddesses, Hindu gods. They were logicians. Right? Our book, and with which we start, first year undergraduate, which is called Bhasha Paricheta, Siddhanta Muktavali, which is a Nyaya text. It starts with Nutana Jaladhara Ruchaye, Gopa Badhuti Dukula Chauraya, Namak Krishnaya, Sangasara Mahiruvasya Bijaya. Not just, you'll say, that's just an invocation. After that, he gets down to the business. No, all through. And this attitude, I don't know where this is coming from, is at the heart of our meta-poetry, with which the second verse, the first verse, which is called the first poetry in Indian tradition of the Sanskrit, which is Valmiki's curse to the hunter. Ma nishad pratishtham tvamagama. After that verse, apparently, before that, nobody spoke in Anushtup verse. Now Valmiki, who was not a poet, he just got angry. And he got empathic, he got compassionate at the death of one of the lovebirds. Yat krauncha mithunat ekam abadhi kama mohitam. But after that, he is no longer thinking about the hunter. He's not about to curse only. He says, Shokartena asya shakune kimidam vyaritam maya. What did I just now do? What is this about poetry? What is this? He is not doing a meta-analysis. He is not doing a literary theory of what he did. He is not measuring the meter. He is just wondering, what did I do? And this wonder, this is expressed by interrogatives. And in this verse, this hymn, which Vivekananda calls the greatest and the earliest poetry of humankind. Na sadasit no sadasit tadanim tama asit tamasa godhamagre ambakkim asit gahanam gabhiram. And it ends by saying, maybe he who the absolute Brahman knows, but it ends by saying, maybe even he does not. And this in one small verse, 10 occurrences of the WH word of Kim. Kim avariva kuha kasya sharman kasya arthe. So there are all these questions. And what does question show? Not knowledge, but doubt and lack, a confession of ignorance. We don't know. And a famous passage of the post-Shankara Advaita work, Vivarana Prameya Sangraha, tries to establish the existence of a positive veil of ignorance on the basis of the following inference. And the inference is about the first lighting in a thick, deep pitch darkness. If you light a match or a candle, that first flame, it has to arise, it has to emerge by, as it were, removing the thick darkness all around. That's the idea. This is how it goes. First premise. If a freshly obtained knowledge, piece of knowledge, that is the paksha. Like the hill has fire because it has smoke. So in the case of hill, here it is pramana jnanam, any jnanam, not just brahma jnanam, any knowledge. Okay? You are talking about quantum mechanics, the two-slit experiment, and you will say, okay, I have just come to know experimentally that the photon could not have gone but from either this slit or that slit. But yet it went on the other side, this knowledge. It wasn't there before. Okay? About that, second premise, must have been preceded by an ignorance. Just like the illumination of a first lit lamp in darkness is preceded by a positive concealing veil of gloom or darkness, substance distinct from the mere prior absence of the light. Aloka pragabhava vyatirikta. Not just the light, this light was not there, its absence was there. No, plus there was darkness. Similarly about ignorance. Right? Both the light and the knowledge manifest that which was hitherto unmanifested. It's from these passages and my study of the Nasadiya Suktam that I changed for my teaching and my writing the old cliched adjective mind independent for realism. That if somebody is a realist, they think that the objects that we come to know are not made by our knowledge, they are independent of our knowledge, mind independent. I have rejected that word. I call them ignorance tolerant. They tolerate our ignorance until we come to know them. And how do we know them? By removing, not from everywhere, just from that place, I remove the ignorance. Advaita metaphysics thus compare darkness and ignorance and suggests that this ignorance, like the play of shadows in a three-dimensional field of vision, gives delineation and body to the empirically known objects. It's like a shiny armor in Rembrandt's painting of the Night Watch, which shines because all around it. In fact, Rembrandt did a bigger painting of Judas returning the coins after he had, repentance, because he tattled about Jesus, and he is returning the coins. Each coin on the floor in Rembrandt's painting is shining like anything, and the rest of the entire canvas is totally dark. Right? To know is to therefore discover. To remove the covering of ignorance. Lewis Carroll, who was Vivekananda, in a lecture here I have quoted Vivekananda saying that I love this book. This should be absolutely obligatory reading for all monastic people. Everybody should look through the looking glass and, Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll wrote a series of poems which came out in a book called Sylvie and Bruno. And there he talks about this discovery. But that's Lewis Carroll, which is that the real good dish, the delicacies are covered by a dish. And if you have to discover them, then you have to undiscover them, because they're discovered now. So this is all about darkness. Now, if darkness is comparable to ignorance, then what is the light of knowledge? And we know here, for those of us who has gone through a cosmopolitan education in philosophy, I hope in our over-enthusiasm for indigenize Indian knowledge systems and abolishing all other philosophy, we don't stop. Like for at least 150 years, all philosophy students in all universities in villages also have been reading Plato's Republic. Without that, you can't get an undergraduate degree in philosophy also. So all of this, of course, we have to resist the temptation. But this darkness and the shadows, you cannot but think of the cave. It's all in the cave and coming out and getting dazzled outside. If darkness is comparable, to know X may mean at least three things. To have a perception of X, to possess the concept of X, and to have a word for X. The relationship between these three levels is a separate and difficult problem. One of the earliest Indian philosophical poems we just read out from the Rig Veda, which reflects on what was there in the very beginning of the cosmos. When I taught Nasadiya Sukta to a simple Honolulu, Hawaii undergraduate second year, this Nasadiya Sukta. At the end of the semester, I don't even know her name, a girl in the class, she wrote that this is a description of at least three things. It's a description of the origin of the universe. It's a description of how a poetry is written. Initially, you don't know. It's a watery womb of some kind of, imaginative amniotic fluid. And then it gradually comes up. And then she said, it is more clearly, because there is a talk about a string in this that divides, that it is about the birth of a child. And then she ended by saying, at least the fourth thing that it describes is how I wrote this paper. Now, this is Nasadiya Sukta's greatness, that it can access all these crevices of ordinary, half-knowing, half-ignorant people. Pushed to the limit, the perennial question concerning the origin of the universe or the beginning of life thus soon recedes back into the question, why am I asking these questions? What is making it possible that I can use words to mean this interrogative thought? What gives the first push to speech, to these words of mine, to these questioning thoughts? So you have an entire Upanishad which is called Whereby Upanishad. Whereby? Kena. Kena. And the first verse is 4 questions. Kene shitam patati preshitam mana kena prana prathama praiti yukta kene shitam vacham imam vadanti imam vacham. These words that I am saying, chakshu srotram kaudevo junakti, putting together the visual and the auditory. What does that give us? Video. Indo-European, same root as vid, from which Veda comes. Hearing sounds and seeing colors. Chakshu shrotram kaudevo junakti. What is very interesting, very few people, even great Indologists, pay attention to this, is that While it says in the beginning was tamas, darkness, covered by our ignorance, another darkness. An excellent example of this meditative movement from cosmological to self-referential inquiry into the act of inquiry is to be found in one of the earliest hymns of Rig Veda, not 10.129, but Prathama Mandala, first 1.164. And it is the mantra drashta, the seer, the sage, who does not write it because it is authorless, but he perceives it, this poem. And that man's name is Long Darkness, Dirghatamas. What a beautiful name, Dirghatamas. Pauranika legend is that he was born blind. So he is like even Vinod Bihari was not born blind, but this guy was born blind. And he perceived the greatest Nasadiya Sukta is also seen by him. And the two birds famous from the Vedas in the Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, Dva Suparnasa Yujasakai, also Dirghatamas. And he starts by saying, I don't know the answer to these questions. I am immature. Aham ajna. I am ignorant. He uses the word paka. Yet to be cooked, my mind is. My mind is still raw. Who will tell me? Ko dadarsha prathamam jayamanam. The first to be born, who witnessed it? Who witnessed it? I ask my over-smart Ashoka University students who say, we don't believe in testimony. Everything I believe in, I have seen it myself in a lab. So I said, when were you born? What's your date of birth? He gives the birth. So I said, as you were coming out of mother's womb, did you check the calendar? What kind of empirical knowledge is that? How do you know? He said, no, I have a document. I can read the document. I said, that's called testimony, man. Look at his language. Koda. Who saw the first being to be born? When the boneless one bore in her womb this world with bones. The unstructured. Okay? Asthihina. Without asthi. Unstructured. It was like a chaos, right? From that, a skeleton comes. Life and blood might have come from earth, but where would self or consciousness come from? Who would approach the wise ones with these queries of mine, with an immature, raw mind, yet to be cooked? I ask this because I simply do not know these deep matters, too deep even for the gods. The heaven above, I know, is my father and sustainer. This vast, expensive earth is my mother. I ask you, what is the limit of this earth? Where is the center, navel, Nabhi, of this world? Vishwasya Nabhi, where the umbilical cord is connected. What is the sperm that gave birth to this mighty horse, the sun, that makes the year, and where is the supreme space for all speech? Notice how the words of the metaphysical search for original limits of the world loop back to the topic of the primal site of speech, because this is a speech. Recall Matilal's book title, The Word and the World. If the world began to exist at that time, at the first Big Bang, what was happening just before that moment? The answer of the physicists is that that's an illegitimate question. But then the current Vice Chancellor of Ashoka University, who is a cosmologist and an astrophysicist, Somak Rai Chaudhuri. He is coming to my class that I'm teaching on darkness and shadows to talk about dark matter and dark energy. And I asked him, what's the difference? He said, dark matter is something that is matter, and we know that. But dark energy, there is much vaster amount of that in the world. I said, why is it called dark? He said, because we don't know anything about it. It's made of our ignorance. Well, even if this initial period of time was strictly uneventful, it must have been without a beginning. Is the fact that it is being born, coming into existence, a part of the brief history of the world, or just outside it? Wittgenstein wrote in the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus that death is not an event in life. What Hannah Arendt, if he met Wittgenstein, would have made him ask himself is birth an event in your life? Your birth definitely happens to your mom. Does it happen to you? Because already you are there for anything to happen to you. But when birth happens, you are not there. So it's the same problem. At first, Brihadaranyaka starts, all was covered by death. In my last paragraph, with which I'll end, I'll make a reference to this. What does death mean? Brihadaranyaka says, death is hunger. Mrityur nama ashanaya. Ashanaya is kshuda, hunger. Hunger, a cosmic hunger to become. A bursting appetite for a variegated set of worlds. The universe emerged with a bang out of the womb of this voracious want. The question is, was this want just an absence, or was it a thick, fluid darkness? Samudrad arnavadati sangvatsaro, time arises from a total ocean. If anybody is interested, it's not an easy read, but you can read a dialogue by Plato called Timaeus. Timaeus, Timeus, Timaeus. And Indian humans are no exceptions. Contrary to Heidegger's proudly prejudiced, sanctioned ignorance that ontology and theoria are exclusive characteristics of the European mind, an established text interpretive strategy adopted by ancient commentators of Vedic passages turns cosmogony into a grammar of reflective experience. The origin of the universe talk is just best done in terms of the phenomenology of the darkness of our ignorance. So I'm now narrowing down this analogy from cosmology to not just epistemology. What it feels like to not know. Not like a skeptic, but like somebody who is hungry for knowledge. In the beginning was darkness. When the answer is returned, what was there? One meaning of that could be, at the root of this query lies the dark cloud of my unknowing. A sort of properly ahistorical, even Christianity has ahistorical texts. One of the greatest texts that the Catholics, Saint Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas himself, keeps quoting, is by a man called Pseudo-Dionysius, the Areopagite. And his book is called The Cloud of Unknowing. The Cloud of Unknowing. Unless there were ongoing, fairly rule-governed rational debates about where the universe first came from, what there is, and how best one should live in the world, the plethora of ontological hypotheses such as everything came from time, everything came from chance, everything came from Prakriti or nature, everything came from laws, niyama, everything came from a human person, Purusha Evedagum, Purusha Sukta, or a pregnant void as source of all that there is, could not have surfaced. Shvetashvatara Upanishad lists 10 of those alternatives, doesn't decide that this is the right one. They keep debating. Of course, nowadays, the problem is that these guys had nothing to do. So we are very busy people. So we want to know the right answer. Basically, we don't want to think. We want to be told what to think. Right? That is against even the ancient, the Vedic, the Tantric, all schools. You would say, well, at least within one school, Shankara school, let us say, everybody follows one. No. The Vivarana school from which I will be using my main argument today is opposite. For example, there is a YouTube video where Swami Sarvapriyananda is answering the question, where does the original avidya or ignorance stay? What is its locus? In Jiva or in Brahman? And he first laughs. He says, this is too big a question. But then he answers it. And he says, it cannot exist in the Jiva. Because without ignorance first there, out of Brahman, the Jiva cannot be sliced out. The Jiva is a product of avidya, so it cannot house the avidya. So then where will it have to be? This darkness of ignorance, it will have to be in that pure consciousness, Brahman himself, but Brahman cannot have, sun cannot have darkness in it. So both options are gone. So he says, no. The Vivarana school thinks that it is in Brahman that avidya exists, but avidya is not as real as Brahman. And Vachaspati Mishra's Bhamati school says, now you'd say, oh, well, Sarvapriyanandaji, please tell us which one is right. Right? And that is supposed to be the bhakti attitude. But that is not correct. That is not correct. Even about what is your Ishta Devata, which is a bhakti question, alternatives are given. Jainas got that well, right? There is a beautiful verse by a grammarian who was obviously either Vishnu or Shiva devotee. So either horizontal or vertical, doesn't matter. He says, Shashikhanda Mauli, either by a crescent moon on the head, Sa Shikhanda. Shikhanda is peacock feather. One who wears a peacock feather is Shikhandin. Shashikhanda Mauli, Sa Shikhanda Mauli Va, Sita Megha Charu, white cloud. Shiva. Shiti Megha Charuba, Shiti dark. Shiti Kanta, Nilakanta. Shiti Megha Charuba. Umaya Vilasi, Ramaya Vilasi Ba, Mama Kinchidastu Hridi Vastu Santatam. Whatever it is, either of them, let it be in my heart. This either or is the spirit. Okay? Doesn't mean doubt. There are two places where either or is used, even in English. And the va. Yadi va na veda, last line of Nasadiya Sukta. One is in doubt, when you can't decide. The other is not about indecision. The other is on freedom. Kartum, akartum, anyata kartum va. I can do it this way or that way. That's an empowering or. Which American kids, my child is an American kid. So, he's Indian, but she grew up here. So she would always ask, what are my options? About food. Ultimately choosing, like all the other kids, completely following the trend, but she needs to know what options she has to feel, because or is there. Some of the most celebrated cosmological outpourings of the Vedic mind exhibit two unmistakably philosophical features. Let me skip a little bit here and come to enough about the Nasadiya Suktam. I already said Shankara defines ajnana or avidya in three ways. One is through avaranatmaka, something that covers avidya. The second is projects. So this ignorance does not stop by blocking knowledge. It projects error. It is a mark of an ignorant person. And you see that in students all the time. They wouldn't say, I don't know, because they would make up something and go into errors, right? So you have to gradually correct those errors and get them. Beautiful discussion in the same text about God being omniscient. Does he know our errors? Because in order to empathically know what it is to be in error, he has to be in error, but he cannot be in error. So then it says, Ishwaraha Brantijno. He knows the Branti, Natu Branta. He is not Branta, but he Brantijno. He knows what. It's like a good teacher. Yoga Sutra defines Ishwara as Sa Purveshamapi Guru Kalena Anavacheda, the first teacher of all teachers. This is not Brahman, by the way. This is Ishwara. Karl Popper first proposes the concept of God or Ishwara by saying Ishwara is one unliberated soul, and very accurate, correct. Ishwara never got liberated because he never was in bondage. The words avidya is mentioned in the very ancient Isha Upanishad in a puzzling passage. I won't deal with those passages. 9, 10 and 11 of Isha Upanishad. There is one hour YouTube video by Sarvapriyananda on these three, 9, 10 and 11. Because 9 says, those who worship ignorance go into deep darkness. And those who worship knowledge go into even deeper darkness. Andang tamah prabhishanti ye avidyam upasate tato bhuya ivate tamah ye uvidyayam rata. Second verse says, vidyancha avidyancha yastad veda ubhayam saha. Those who know both knowledge and ignorance together. Avidyaya mrityum tirtva, by going across death through avidya. Because all karma, Shankara says, is avidya. Without ignorance, there is no action. All action is avidya. I won't go into that, but this is his interpretation. Vidyaya amritam ashnute. So both have to be there. So vidya and avidya. So avidya is not the devil. Avidya and darkness, these are not to be shunned. They give, I think of it as art history. They give the depth, the three-dimensionality of a cup, of a chin in Galerina Ceciliani, which is in Poland, in Krakow, which is Leonardo's the lady with the ermine, that painting. Leonardo talks about that painting in his notebooks. There is a chin, and the darkness and the semi-darkness on the chin, that makes the chin come out. The three-dimensionality, the chaya. Okay? And just as this is true in painting, it is true in the Durga Saptashati. Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Chaya Rupena Samstita. Why Chaya? Avidya. Let us now move on. Okay, now we all know that when anyone claims to know something, there are two nodes or poles or necessary conditions of that knowledge. The knower subject, pramata, the knower, who knows, the person who knows, and the object of knowledge, the prameya, the object of knowledge. What J.N. Mohanty does in a path-breaking paper called The Dialectic of Knowledge and Ignorance. I actually wanted to dedicate this paper of mine, which I have just written for here, okay, to Professor J.N. Mohanty and his teacher, Mahamahopadhyay Jogendranath Sankhya Vedanta Tirtha, whose book Advaita Vedanta and who wrote a commentary on Madhusudana Saraswati's magnum opus Advaita Siddhi called Balabodhini for easy understanding. And he taught painstakingly this text, parts of, and the Vivarana Prameya Sangraha to J.N. Mohanty. So we all know, and J.N. Mohanty, what he does in a path-breaking paper called The Dialectic of Knowledge and Ignorance in Avidya is to follow his teacher Mahamahopadhyay Jogendranath and extend this subject-object bipolarity, the knower and the known, from knowledge to ignorance. Nobody has done this in English. We all talk about the object of knowledge. Mohanty opens the discourse. What is the object of ignorance? Ignorance has equal intentionality. Now, what's the problem? We know that. But look at how it leads to one of the juiciest paradoxes in philosophy. If I am ignorant of the future, let us say I am ignorant of the date on which Russia-Ukraine war will really stop, then I am the locus of the ignorance, ajnana, ashraya, or the subject of the ignorance, and the future date of Russia-Ukraine war ending is the object of the ignorance. I have innumerable ignorances. For example, I have ignorances about all the isotopes of a certain chemical element. And I can distinguish between these ignorances by their objects. Distinct objects, distinct ignorance. What is it an ignorance of? Now, that requires that when I am ignorant of something and I am aware that I don't know this, I must know both the ashraya, whose ignorance it is. I should not say it's the ignorance of my teacher or ignorance of my student. It's my ignorance. Just as I have to know the ashraya of the ignorance, I have to know the object of the ignorance. What is it that I don't know? Now, the sight of the ignorance, and I must be aware of what it is that I am ignorant of. Now, that is the beginning of what I would call the paradox of ignorance. All of you should understand now, this is not very difficult, which has a close connection with Plato's paradox of inquiry in the dialogue called Meno. Even the most elementary phenomenology of ignorance seems to require that to know my own ignorance of X is to both be unaware of X, because I am ignorant of it, and be aware of X, because that is the object of my ignorance. So aware and unaware together. How is that going to happen? Let us now move on to ignorance about the self. In his 16th century, this part, I would like, perhaps there should have been a tea break here, because I want everybody's brains to get a little perked up. And this I cannot litter with my bad jokes. It's a serious matter. In his 16th century magnum opus, Advaita Siddhi, Proving Non-Duality, that's the title of the book, Madhusudana Saraswati offers three sorts of perceptual, experiential proofs in support of the view that our ignorance in general and specifically our self-ignorance is a positive entity, this view, which is opposed to this view. So that's the argumentation. These are expressed, these three proofs, this is called three pratyakshas, are expressed by three paradigmatic feelings and their corresponding verbal expressions. First, that I am ignorant, generally. I am not knowledgeable. I am ignorant. Second, that I do not know myself. Mam anyam cha na janami. In Western philosophy, the problem of other minds is huge. And self-knowledge is discussed. Only very recently, a junior contemporary of mine, also a student of Professor Strawson, called Qasim Qassam, has written a book in which there is one chapter on ignorance about the self. And third, I do not know the meaning of your words. This shows that culturally, the context of expressing ignorance, the most common context was in discourse. You wouldn't jump to refute your opponent. In a debate, you'd first say, I don't understand what you are saying. Bhavaduktam, twaduktam artham na janami. I don't know. I can hear your words, but I don't know. I have no clue what you mean. So that's the third kind of ignorance. In this lecture, I shall discuss only the first and a little bit second sort of phenomenological evidence. When a reflective human being feels and says, I am ignorant, I don't know myself, what is the nature of this ignorance? Let us resist the temptation here of paraphrasing this avowal as I don't know who I am in some kind of a therapist's sense. Also, we are not here speaking of an advanced Alzheimer's sufferer or any such pathological amnesia or aphasia. The common sense position of Nyaya and dualist Vedantins here, Madhva Vedantins, has a strong initial plausibility. It's simple. The linguistic form of negation of knowledge clearly shows what one is experiencing, lack or absence of knowledge. Against this absence of knowledge view, the non-dualist Madhusudana Saraswati puts forward a powerful destructive dilemma. If your view were correct, then either P or Q. P cannot be the case, Q cannot be the case, therefore your view is not correct. That's called a destructive dilemma. Is this confessed absence of knowledge, the first view, a generic absence of any knowledge whatsoever, jnana samanya bhav? Or is it a jnana vishesha bhav? An absence of a specific piece of knowledge indexed to a particular object of knowledge. To take Jane Mohanty's example, absence of knowledge of quantum mechanics, that someone might admit to, that I don't know quantum mechanics. It cannot be the former, that is, absence of all knowledge, jnana samanya bhav, because by speaking about this absence of all knowledge, the person who is confessing the ignorance is claiming knowledge of both whose ignorance it is. He is calling it my ignorance. So he has the knowledge of the ashraya, of the ignorance, and the subject who lacks knowledge, and a generic knowledge of knowledgehood as the universal which delimits this universally quantified any knowledge that one lacks, given that he is presupposing these two kinds of knowledge in himself. The claim that he has absence of all knowledge is self-refuting. So the first option cannot be held. It could be it could not also be the second or latter option, because a specific absence of some specific knowledge cannot be avowed without some, however vague, knowledge of that particular object object of that knowledge which one fails to find in oneself. The confession, in me, I find lack of knowledge of quantum mechanics, presupposes I know what quantum mechanics is. However vaguely, sketchily, incompletely, which means that my topic-specific ignorance has to coexist with my knowledge of that topic. So the absence theory runs into total ruin. So what is left? And yet, this is truthfully said by many of us. Thus, the absence of knowledge theory of ignorance fails, and one is compelled to accept the positive account of ignorance as something more than absence of knowledge. And now, ancient Sankhya, which was refuted, where Prakriti or matter is made of 3 strands. By the way, please, even if in some Ramakrishna Mission translation they are called qualities, do not ever make the mistake of calling the Sankhya gunas qualities. Then why the word guna? Because the word guna means rope, like in Dhanur guna. Even now fishermen pull a boat, and that is called guntana. So these are the 3 gunas. Ramakrishna says, the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, are not qualities. They are purushasya bandhana rajju. They are binding ropes. And I call them TTT or DDD. Delight, dynamicity, darkness. Delight, sattva, sattvam, sukhe sanjayati. Dynamicity, rajas, and darkness, tamas. Or transparency, trouble, and torpor. Transparency of sattva, trouble of rajas. Without trouble, you don't move. Okay? And torpor, Any ignorance, as Mohanty argues perspicuously, must have a locus and an object. It has to be someone's ignorance about some subject matter or topic. For example, Slavoj Žižek may confess that he is clueless about Madhusudana Saraswati's Advaita Siddhi. This ignorance is located in Žižek, and it is its object is the text Advaita Siddhi, which I have been talking about. I can admit to my ignorance, Arindam, can admit to my ignorance of the genetic structure of octopuses. But with self-ignorance, there is a problem. The locus and the object are the same. Whose ignorance? Mine. About whom? Me. Right? This whole talk is a teaser, because we are just getting warmed up, and we'll stop at warming up. The official Advaita theory faces huge complications, not only for the absence of knowledge theory, but even for the positive ignorance theory, according to which all ignorance is witnessed directly by witness consciousness. There are 2 kinds of awarenesses. One is epistemic pramana chaitanya, and the other is sakshi chaitanya, witness consciousness. Witness consciousness does not oppose. Witness consciousness tolerates our ignorances. It just watches. Pramana consciousness is like a bully of a teacher who can't tolerate error in others, and it eliminates. Witness consciousness just watches. It's like the bird which doesn't peck at the fruit, just watches. Witness consciousness is also the registering of pleasure and pain. Like Wittgenstein, Advaita Vedanta says it makes no sense to say, I have knowledge of my pain. Because my pain, anything that we have knowledge of, must be an object which is ignorance tolerant. But pain cannot exist without my registering. And definitely, as soon as the pain happens, the moment I register it, no one has the right to say, you are feeling pain, but you don't have pain. But about an object of pramana, you can say that. So these are sakshi bhasya. They are illuminated by this non-interfering. Some sakshi does not want to translate knowledge into dollars. Pramana does. Pramana goes into successful activity. Sakshi is actually identical with pure consciousness. Sakshi Chaitanya is ultimately that Shuddha Chaitanya. So, absences are known by a separate pramana called Anupalabdhi. That is why Ajnana cannot be an absence. Ajnana is known by Sakshi. Okay? And that is true of even our ignorance of ourselves. Now I come to the last part. Why are we afraid of to know ourselves? There is a sense in which the self can never be an object of knowledge. The subject cannot be object. Shankara almost cracks a joke here. The most profound point, the questioning of the Buddhist theory of self-consciousness, Shankara says, gives the famous analogy of anyone who claims to know himself is like a very proud acrobat. And he says, however skillful this young acrobat may be, he cannot ride on his own shoulder. Nijas kandhe arodum na shaknoti. Kushalopi natavatu. There's a boy, acrobat. He cannot rise. Thus, the self can never be known. And this matches with the middle of the Kena Upanishad, which says, those who claim to know the self do not know it. Avijñātam vijānatam. Those who say we have known, they don't know it. And those who confess to not knowing it, like Socrates did, and the Delphic oracle said, he is the only one who knows. The real knowers say, and the Kena Upanishad, real knowers are those who say we don't know. Yet Shankara himself says, at the end of his prefatory commentary, I've told Sarvapriyanandaji to do a year-long explanation of that preface called Adhyasa Bhashya, the beginning, before Athato Brahma Jignasa. Right. He ends that by saying, Nahi ekantena vishaya. The self is not entirely a non-object. Through via negativa, by saying what it is not, and by metaphorical extension of the secondary significance of the term you and that in you or that. Great sentence, Mahavakya. The self can be, as it were, indirectly known. Right? Emily Dickinson says, tell all the truth, but tell it with a slant. The slant. Yet Shankara himself says that. Tagore says in a poem, this my task of knowing myself will never end. Apnake hi jana amar phurabe na. And perhaps therefore the self has to be known as the ultimate unknown. K.C. Bhattacharya says, it is meant by the word I as an unmeant, unmeanable. Ignorance and errors about the nature of self, Swami Sarvapriyananda says in many of his lectures, is the root cause of suffering. Yet, we shrink away from the truth about ourselves, from Tattva Jnana, as if that is going to take away our pleasures and happinesses. Do we misidentify our sufferings as bliss? What does ignorance cause then? Pain or bliss? Now I come to my last paragraph. The main metaphysical reason why I'm terrified of knowing myself has to do with the fear of losing my individuality, my difference from others. This is a kind of primordial FOMO, fear of missing out on plurality and otherness. This is the transcendental terror of facing the falsity, the mithyatva of the world of objects, which, thanks to this fond ignorance, this dear darkness, I take to be given datum, presented to me. Who wants to part with gifts? It's the given. For my thirsty outward senses, my paranchikhani, Vyatrinat Swayambhu. Though all my life I whine about and cry about unfulfilled desires, the possibility of being Purna, being Atmakama, Akama, Aptakama, Nishkama, scares me. Because deep down I have an unacknowledged hunger, my source, the mrityu, the hunger, the death. An unacknowledged hunger for that primordial gloom which Brihadaranyaka Upanishad calls Ashanaya eva mrityu. Hunger is that death. I have an appetite for appetite. More than food. The fear of having to bear the burden of my real freedom, which is the freedom from those temporal, spatial and particularizing limitations, desha kala vastu paricheda, which has provided me. We are grateful to those limitations because they have provided me for birth after birth, the excuse for not bearing the unbearably infinite responsibility for and fully felt empathy with the suffering of all living beings. What can I do? I am limited. That a bodhisattva or a Vivekananda feels. Thank you. A little bit, yes, why not? But she might have to go.
Yes, we will take her.
Right.
You have a question, please put your hand up.
I really don't know this subject very well.
Please come to the front, we have a microphone.
But at least, Professor Spivak, I hope I have convinced you that I am positively ignorant.
Yes. Almost.
Yes, almost. Yes.
Almost.
Yes.
It's it's not everyone in the world I can't meet. That, of course, brings us right back to things that I talk about.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
That is like trying to combine Vivekananda and Levinas.
Something like that.
Right.
Why
Infinite responsibility.
everything
Infinite.
remorse.
Right.
Thank you.
Remorse, yes.
Namaste, sir.
Yes.
Sir, my name is Prithviraj.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. The two questions. One is around Thakur says God cannot be known, but in certain places he also says God can be known by the pure mind because pure mind is God.
Yes. Shuddhamune, yes. In fact, that evening prayer that is done in Belur Math, this Bhavasagara Tarana Karana hai, that has that line, Mahima Tava Gochara Shuddhamune. But you have answered your question in some sense, that I was not talking about knowledge of God, I was talking about knowledge of self. And I was not even talking about Paramatma self, but my real nature. I mean, just when I say I am ignorant, obviously for most of us, the more ignorant you are, the more proud you are. You would say, I know this and that and so on. Everybody, all adults these days, more or less identify all arrogance as insecurity. Everybody knows that, right? That much wisdom is there. Although that's why I don't understand why, even in personnel management, all the managers, they hire these arrogant people. Because they should not, because these are insecure people, right? Anyone who can advertise themselves with, like showing that I have got, in our academic world, that I have got, already 4 publications, and then inventing 16 others which are forthcoming, which will remain forthcoming till he goes to the grave. But he gets hired. I mean, this seems like, I don't know, it's maybe a andena iva niyamana jatanda, like the employers themselves are full of themselves. So they don't have knowledge of their ignorance. So they like if a compatriot. So this is the kind of knowledge of God has, what Thakur says is actually, unbeknownst to him, an echo of a great philosopher called Spinoza. He said that the ultimate intuitive knowledge, above rational knowledge, is called scientia intuitiva, which is immediately, that knowledge is intellectual love of God. And he says that is actually God's knowledge of himself. So when a human being becomes free of his bondage of reason and experience, both, he gets that scientific. But as you said, the mind with which he gets it, it becomes God's mind. So you're right there. So that's more on the side of self-knowledge. My topic today was self-ignorance. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Namaskar and pranams, Professor. Seeking clarifications on 2 points that I heard in your wonderful performance. If we were to have appetite for food versus appetite for appetite, as you just posed, how would things change?
Yes. Well, we cannot acknowledge it. When I said we have an appetite for appetite, we don't think so ourselves. We think it is appetite for food. But if we get a detached look, if we take a look at ourselves, we'll see that pretty much everything I wanted I got, but I wasn't satisfied. So why is that? Then one answer is that, and this is true not only for gustatory food, but also for sexual appetite, because people take medications, not to drugs, not to actually have satisfaction, but to have more craving. Now, how would things change? Luckily, this is very complex, and that's why in the Mahabharata, which has the Bhagavad Gita, there is a small 5 verses called the Kama Gita at the end. And there also, Sri Krishna is the speaker. Right? Those of you who have sort of delved a little bit into the spiritual matter of seed syllables called bija mantras, you would, if you look up, you will find out that the Kama Bija is the Krishna Bija, same. So Krishna is almost himself desire, right? So instead of saying, like Buddhist Jainas would say, and Christians definitely would say, that, oh, this desire, this appetite is really what is really evil. It's coming from somewhere else. No, it is coming from God himself. And of course you could say sublimate or something, but the good counterpart, spiritually good counterpart in bhakti of appetite for appetite, is what is called viraha bhakti. Do you understand? That I don't want to be united. I want to constantly want you. And that happens for Radha better when she's away. She can never get it. There's a very, very nice, humorous English literary expression of that in a novel called Passage to India by E.M. Forster. So there is a character who is most probably a Maharashtrian called Godbole. So Godbole is introducing a very sophisticated British officer, an expat here, to the culture in that city, Indian city. And he takes him to a kirtan where they are singing love songs of Krishna and Radha. And it's the British person's dinner time. So he wants to leave. But the Krishna has not yet come. So as a polite gesture, he gets up and tells the singers that you are taking a break, but I have to go. But I hope he comes soon. And Godbole comes out and says to him, you just ruined it. You don't understand, he never comes. There's just pining. That's part of bhakti also. I'm not saying therefore that, every time you've got great food, you just go into fasting. But there is something to be said for that. But this unending, this is something again I've learned from my guru, and similar to that, there is a Kathamrita, the Gospels reference also. Somebody complained that if God really wanted us to have self-realization, He would not have made our mind so restless. And both my teacher and Sri Ramakrishna says, it's a great blessing that the mind is restless. Great blessing. That our desires are unsatisfiable. And Ramakrishna puts it beautifully. He says, otherwise, if it was fixed, it would have sat like a bee on a physical, material object and never got up. But it is dissatisfied. It goes from one flower to another. That's good. It will sit down when it gets, like the previous questioner said, when the mind is clarified. Then it's no longer mind. You lose the mind. You become mindless. But its restlessness saves us from getting stuck to the external world. It's a great blessing. If we were not so distracted, we would put all our obsessive attention on one object. And if that object is a human being, that object would resent that the most. It's thanks to our restless mind that we think of other things. Only one thing, one entity can bear the load of all our attention forever in one place, on the feet of God. Only He can bear it. Otherwise, people don't. Even the most loved people don't like it if you obsess on them. So the restlessness of the mind, the unappeasability of our appetite is a great benefit. It's a great blessing. Sorry for the long answer. Right.
And a follow-up. So in the framework of Advaita, we speak about active ignorance, which is typically mitigated by jnana, knowledge, right? So essentially, what is the difference between this active ignorance and the positive ignorance that we just spoke about right now?
No, this is the same. No difference, because positive ignorance has two powers. One is called avarana shakti, covering. The other is vikshepa shakti. It throws up something. So, insofar as karma, at least in Shankara's interpretation, is always pushing us to do something else, This is rajas, the second dynamicity. This is like my troubling myself to whipping myself up for another action. Without that, you don't have activities. So that kind of action is coming from avidya. But it can be good avidya. Somebody who says, like honestly, somebody who is decorating their shrine with new flowers, with new something, with new incenses. That is also avidya. But good avidya in some sense. Until it quietens down and it becomes less and less and less and ritualistic. Nothing wrong with rituals. And all the music, all the different stotras and Sanskrit, all boils down to just one name, one syllable, and just repeating that more or less. And then just that marrying that to a breath and so on. Okay? But I'm degenerating into a pop guru, so I should not answer this.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your great talk. I wanted to ask again about the appetite for appetite. So in Shakta and Kashmiri Shaivism texts, they consider the desire to be of two kinds. One that is born out of poverty of something, and the other is born out of fullness of something.
Fullness, yes, spilling over.
So is the appetite for appetite also the same thing? Is it like born out of lack of something and then also out of fullness of something?
Two kinds. My general principle, I have been, in fact, Sangeeta is part of that. For the last 6 years, we are reading one verse in 1 month, 2-hour sessions on Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vimarshini of Abhinav Gupta on Kashmir Shaivism. And what I have noticed is that the poverty or because of lack, I want more, that is distinguished very clearly from the spilling over. Now you might wonder, if you spill over, where is the desire in that? Because desire sounds like a want. The distinction is very clear. In the first kind, want, you feel constrained, not free. In the second kind, you feel playful and free. It's up to you. Whereas desire is, you are waiting for the world to give you that. You feel constrained by the world, by the external. Okay? And you blame. Hey, I was supposed to get it, I didn't get it. That's something else. But in the second one, you make it yourself. Okay? And this is which comes, I would put it together with the Vedic idea with which I started. That what is hunger? Hunger is death. But in Tantra, death is identified not just with Shiva but with his Shakti Kali. Just read Swamiji's Let Shyama Dance There, that poem, Vivekananda's. Kali the mother, one of them, and you will see the beauty of death. And it is all poetic inspiration is coming from that, from that death. And there are subtle hints of that. We cannot just do it in a long lecture like that. But one has to read for oneself and see how this is not cynical. This is not, somebody saying that, oh, everything will end anyway, so I am asking you to go to the funeral ground and, cremation ground and practice. Not like that. Even if you are a creative artist, you start with a plan, but your final success comes when you give it up. Give it up. And you know where, just as first verse of Ishopanishad, Tyaktena Bhunjita. Tyaga is renunciation. But with renunciation you do bhog of a different kind. I'll end, let this be the last question. So I'll end with a story, not from the Indian tradition, but from the Greek tradition. And that too from a skepticism book by a man called Sextus Empiricus. He talks about this state of quietude which comes when both options are rejected and you don't get stuck with either yes or no, like the beginning of the Vinasadiya Sukta, neither existence nor non-existence. Then he gives an example. What comes out of it? He says that there was a painter in Alexander the Great's court called Apelles. He was a master painter. He has done a painting of the young Alexander taming a horse called Bucephalus. So the horse's front feet are up and every muscle of the shiny horse's body he has done perfectly. But for months he is stuck because he can't do the foam, the froth in the mouth of the horse. He can't do it. Without that, the painting is not complete. So he gives up. I can't do it. He takes the white paint brush, washes it in turpentine, throws it at the canvas. The brush goes and paints the froth. This is what Tyaktena Bhunjita means. That's all. Thank you.